Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms where I give you a heads up about upcoming shows and which date and time they will be aired. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the shows, MP3 files which you can download, or links to your favorite platform like iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and all other major sources. You can find information for upcoming and past talk show appearances as well as new book projects at MarlenePardo.com. You can also purchase books and merchandise there, and you can visit my author page on Amazon at Marlene Pardo Pellicer. Due to popular demand, I'm narrating my True Believer stories that I've collected throughout the years in a new series called Supernatural Storytime. You can find links at supernaturalstorytime.com. If you are into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate some of those at Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If you would like to read noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I do want to thank you all for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Doing good? Yes, I'm very happy. I'm doing good. I'm very happy because number one, it's an update on my micro farming adventures. Like in South Florida, it's hot, humid, but luckily a lot of rain. And as you know, I've got 100 and plus some saplings out there that not only are they getting a lot of rainwater, which by the way I have found is absolutely the best thing to grow things in. That's number one. Number two, it saves me from a lot of water work. Okay, because otherwise, which I did during the winter, I did making sure that these things are watered. So yeah, a lot of labor intensive stuff that I'm being spared because of the, our rainy season here in South Florida. And also I want to say I'm also real happy. I just found out yesterday that my youngest son, him and his wife announced they're going to have a baby boy. It's my third grandchild. Now due sometime, that in between Christmas to New Year's kind of deal. So maybe we're the family's gonna have a great Christmas present, or maybe one of these, new babies of 2020. Who knows? So yesterday we were throwing all these crazy names at my son, and I gave him a regular name like Andrew, but I was telling him, everybody said, oh, this and that, and I said Thor, and he's looking at me like, Mom, and I was like, okay, I bet you nobody will have a name like that. And he's like, oh, okay, Mom. But anyway, guys, let's get to the important part here, which is who my guest is tonight. I have a gentleman with us today. His name is Ed Roman. Now, Ed is an award-winning singer-songwriter. He's a performer and a multi-instrumentalist from Ontario, Canada. Now, he blurs the line between pop, rock, folk, and country music genres. He is uniquely crafted his songs, and they have received regular rotation on more than 100 terrestrial radio stations across North America and more than 600 stations worldwide. He's won numerous awards, and he's a December 2018 Billboard Magazine Emerging Artist. His animated music video for the title track from his latest album, Red Omen, has been shown at numerous film festivals around the globe. He is a gentleman farmer, a man after my own heart, gardener, and paranormal enthusiast, which of course we're going to talk to him lots about that. He's had several paranormal encounters throughout his life and served as a catalyst for his music, which of course we're absolutely going to ask him about that. So let's welcome him. How are you doing today, Ed?
Marlene, it's great to be here on Miami Ghost Chronicles.
Yes, I am thrilled. And we were talking previously, and we'll get into it later, guys. But you know what I always ask all my guests is, obviously he's a musician, but he's got an interest in the paranormal. Ed, what happened with you? Was it an experience as a kid or as an adult? What happened?
Oh, I grew up too close to the hydro wires.
Hey, anything is possible. EMF,
I gotta start with something crazy, right?
Yeah, man. Let me tell you something.
Why not, right? It was my grandparents. I mean, the first stories that I remember hearing when I was a kid, was dinner table talk,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandmother would talk about her brother,
Okay.
and I'm going to say his name because it's what you were talking about, names, naming children, and you said four, naming
Uh-huh.
child four. It reminds me of the Costanza thing from Seinfeld. Seven, naming child seven, right? Well, his name was Ergi.
Really? That's an
And
unusual
whenever
name.
I used to hear that name, even as a young boy, I always used to think, wow, what a crazy kind of sounding name. But he was born with his hair and his teeth, and at a very young age, at like 6 months, was already speaking, and really
Really?
advanced. Yeah, and really advanced and progressed as a child at an alarming rate.
Okay.
So much so that he would spend time with adults, talking with adults all the time, and philosophizing and stuff. And he had this macabre uh, sort of premonition that he was going to die at the age of 11. And at about the age of 10, he would start practicing his funeral.
Oh my God.
And he would say, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go lie underneath the apple tree. I'm just going to lie down and I'm going to die. And my grandmother was like, people in the village were telling him that he was like a savant, or that he was like a gifted child, and that maybe he was maybe from the devil, or who knows what it may have been,
Oh.
right? But point being was, on the day that he said he was going to die at the age of 11, he did this. And he even had kids come and help him do the whole funeral. And it was really like this. So, like, what is going on here? At the age of, like, 5 or 6, hearing this kind of a story, going,
Uh-huh.
what is this possible? What how can this be possible? What is it that makes this situation special and different? And as a result, it really kind of opened me up as a young person to the potential that a number of different kinds of things in the paranormal world, whether it be
Right.
Bigfoot, because I grew up in the 1970s when that whole Patterson Gimlin
Yes.
film thing
Uh-huh.
re-exploded. And actually, M.K. Davis is a good friend of mine who's done a lot of really incredible research on that film. And at the same time, the ufology community was really burgeoning. We had Project Blue Book. I remember news clips when I was a kid about things landing like in local farm fields and things like that. And with that said, the allegory in my family in 1968, the story goes that my mom was preparing dinner in November, and she started to hear the pipes rattle in the basement of our house, and
Okay.
had gone to the basement to figure out if something was wrong with our sump pump. And this is
Uh-huh.
another one of those stories, as I say. She
Right.
comes to the top of the stairs into the kitchen, and there's a huge bay window, and she thinks a small aircraft is about to crash into our farmhouse, but it's become stable, and it's hovering between our barn and our house. And my
Okay.
grandparents, my brother, sisters, all watched this strange light anomaly that was like an orb that was so hard to look at that you had to kind of keep looking away. Didn't cast any shadows, hovered over our barn, and then followed the topography of the landscape heading to the southeast, and then was reported by the David Dunlop Observatory in Buttonville Airport of them tracking these unidentified flying objects in the night sky. Again, another story in my life
Let me ask you
that
something
made
real
me,
quick. What happened with your
yeah.
uncle?
My great uncle? You mean my
Margaret,
grandmother's
yes.
brother?
Yes.
He died at the age of 11,
Oh, he
exactly
did?
like he said.
I
Oh, yes, he did.
Oh, I caught. Okay, I thought that when you said that, I thought that he had like made like the prediction, but that okay, and he had play
No,
acted the
and he
the
had played.
but he actually. Oh my God, he did then. Oh,
Yes. So those two stories alone,
wow.
the UFO thing, and this child that's born that could speak and had hair and teeth, and all of that made me like start questioning a lot of
Sure,
stuff,
yeah,
like and looking more into the potential of what that could be.
sure,
So
yeah.
that's
That's
where my I'm peaked, right?
uh huh.
You know, and it's hard to kind of talk about when you lose somebody that's really close to you, because they are close to you, and
Yes,
that means that you love them,
of
and
course.
that you care about them, and
Yes.
and and they love and care about you. And with that said, this story, I guess, kind of goes into It happened many years ago now, but I lost a good friend because of a
Okay.
traumatic set of circumstances and an allergy-related anaphylactic shock.
Oh.
And he left a little baby boy, 4.5 months old, a lovely wife, and it
Mm-hmm.
really traumatized our whole community.
Okay.
And our group of friends and everything that was, just sort of living life to its fullest. And
Mm-hmm.
then the night of the wake, I decide to go down to the street. And there's only about 25 of us left at this little pub that's in our local town.
Mm-hmm.
And these three young boys are walking by. And they're talking to each other. And they're talking about how could we break into a junkyard and steal a door that would match the door on their parents' car that they've just wrecked
I
because
was.
they're out of town. Okay. And I'm sitting there going, oh, okay. And I stopped them because I did this exact thing
Oh,
at
really?
about this age. Oh, yeah. Bad boy
It's like
sometimes,
we
right?
need to come up with something quick,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. We need to come up with something quick, right? And it, like, literally driving home with the car door on a bicycle, 2 miles down the road in the middle of the night so nobody could see us. And I said, look, I have to stop you because I can't believe, first of all, I'm not a cop. I
Uh-huh.
said, I can't believe that you guys are telling this story right now because I did this exact thing with three of my other friends. And I said, and one of them was involved, had just passed away, and we're having the wake inside. I said, please, will you come inside because I need you to bring validity to this situation. They won't believe me if I go in there now and tell them that
Right.
this just
What are the
happened on the
odds,
street.
right?
Right. So, yes, okay, they'll come in. Okay, so they come in, it's kind of cold, take off our jackets, people are blah, 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 blah. I say, hey, everybody. I said, I got to tell you something. I was just down on the street, and I said, these three kids were walking down, and they were talking about how they were going to break into a junkyard, steal the car door. And I'm looking around the room, and people are turning white. And I'm like, what's wrong? And one of my friends stands up and says, Ed, we were just telling that story.
Are you kidding? What are the.
Yeah.
That's incredible, Ed. That. And no wonder everybody must have been like, what? Okay.
Freaking out. And a couple
Yes.
people started crying, and
Yes.
I started crying. And I think to myself, and then I tell that story to people, and they think, well, I hate the word coincidence because I don't believe in coincidence. Sometimes things are coincidental just
Yes.
because this is right. Okay. Hey, we bought the same pop, right? Whatever it might be.
But
But other things that are like in the quadrillions to one as
the
far as the
chance that
odds.
these kids are walking down the street and they're retelling an adventure like what you guys
The,
actually did. That right
they
there.
just that exact story. They weren't talking about uh, getting the dog out of a dog pound because they weren't watching it. They weren't talking about how they were going to,
Right.
fix something that they burnt in the house.
Yeah.
It was this crazy circumstance that the chances of that were staggering. And I think to myself, so this is confirmation for me, and knowing that look, it's weird how when you look back, it's not so much in the moment. The moment that those things are happening is what's staggering and what makes you go whoa, 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 and you
Right.
almost can't hold it together. Later, as you look back in those moments, you start analyzing it differently. You still go through the checks and balances of what are the chances are, what did that really happen, and I can't believe all of those things that sort of add up to that same place that you're still thinking about it. And then you go, well, of course he would have done something like that.
Right.
Of course he would have wanted if there was a chance to manipulate the ether in one of the
Right.
most magical ways for affirmation for the
Right.
people that he loved and cared about the most.
Right. Like a
how
happy
more
like memory of crazy stuff. Yeah,
how
exactly.
how more apropos.
Yes,
how
exactly.
how more apropos, and that's where the validity kicks in for me, and I go, I can't discount the experience.
No, absolutely not. No, I can see that no matter how you try to, it's like, no. I mean, you could even, I would say that even without the kids coming down the street, you could say, well, maybe coincidental. I was thinking about that, and inside they were talking about that same incident. That would be, But the fact that those kids, which had no connection to anybody there, your friend, nobody, and they're basically talking about something real time that dovetails with what you guys did. How many years before? Lots of years before. That there's no way that they
Yeah.
could. Come on, that's astronomical. The odds. It's like impossible.
Somebody once, a good skeptical friend of mine once said to me, "Are you sure you weren't set up?" I'm like,
Yeah, like
"How?
yeah,
How
exactly.
the hell? And wouldn't that be a mean, twisted trick
No, no,
to
no,
to, to
no,
play?" No, it's like that's weird. That's
no,
just demented,
no,
right?
no.
Uh,
That's so that. Let me tell you something though,
and
and I hate to say it on such a sad occasion. It kind of changes the atmosphere in a way because it almost feels like he was trying to tell you guys, hey, it's okay. Remember when we had this great time together? You know?
right, and living life in a crazy way, and
Yes.
it was that, and now it eased the pain in that way, and that's where psychologists will kick in and go, well, it's anthropomorphizing and doing this, that, and the other thing to, like if a woman thinks she's pregnant, she starts looking at light bulbs and pears and things, and more commercials for something that's related to pregnancy or something,
Right.
and then but it's how can you rationalize that out of the park with
No.
those kinds of circumstances? It's and again, that's why I'm like, okay, bing, bing, bing. When it becomes physical,
Yes.
when it becomes something where actually physically something has occurred in a way where, well, here's an example. I was the pallbearer at my uncle's funeral, and my uncle and I were very close, and he lost his legs and his fingers and eyesight to diabetes, and
Mm-hmm.
we used to do a lot of fishing together, and he gave me a couple flies that many years ago, but one in particular I used to keep in my fly vest. I still
Okay.
have it today, and it was in the garage when I went to the funeral in my vest.
Okay.
I came home and a terrible storm, something out of a book. And I had to play a gig in Toronto that night.
Okay.
And as I opened the door to my room, there's a little step that went down. And sitting in the middle of the floor when I turned the light on is that fly.
Wow.
The fly had how does something physical leave a
Yeah.
place that's been compartmentalized for a long
Yes.
period of time and I haven't used? It's totemistic to me.
Right.
How does it end up sitting in the center of the floor for the very first thing that I see when I
Right.
turn on
That
the
you
light
couldn't
is that
overlook
fly.
it. You couldn't overlook it. You had to see it.
There was no way to do it. And then at the wake, when I was coming home prior to that, we were all standing around in the kitchen. Again, this is what's interesting about that group of tight knit friends, family after that traumatic moment. It's almost like it's the psychokinetic catalyst for the door to be open for those kinds of things to vibrantly occur if you pay
Yes.
attention to them. Others may discount them, but the doorbell at the house kept ringing over and over again. And we'd go to the
Really?
door, and there'd be nobody there. And because my uncle, he was a bit of a trickster himself.
Okay.
uh, all over and over again for 5 minutes, we're going, checking the windows, looking to see what's going on. I went with my cousin's boyfriend at the time, now husband, to the basement and shut off the breaker for the bell, and it kept ringing.
What?
Yeah, there was no electricity running to the bell, and it kept going off.
You know
And
what?
immediately, a bunch of people at the house went, "It's less, it's less, it's less." So, though, again, people would say, "Wow, there's some electrical disturbance and da 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 da." Well, there's no power to the bell, so why should it be working?
Exactly. How do you explain
And
that?
yeah, and again, that evening with the fly and all that occurring, um, it, it just again brings that validity, like I said before, to those experiences, and it justifies for me in my existence how I interact not only with my living world
Mm-hmm.
but the other world that I'm told by
Right.
high science exists.
Right.
Because I think, we were asking before, and we were talking off air about the connection to that in music, that there are parallels to what I call the discovery of the divine,
Mm-hmm.
in whether it be melody or it might be lyrical ideas.
Right.
And nor by saying that in an egotistical way do I feel like I'm godlike or
No,
divine.
on the
All I
contrary.
feel like is that am a conduit or some kind of a channel, like a medium, would be if you had gone to see them and said, I've lost a loved one, I'm trying to reconnect. That's what the language of music is to me. It's somehow grabbing hold of the emotional content of our existence today,
Right.
now, and trying to reflect it in some kind of a way to say, well,
Right.
yeah, look, this is the experience. And I've had some moments in writing where I'll go and I'll look back at page after page after page and I'll go, where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
It's like stream of consciousness and
Yes.
ideas, and so much so that they've hit me so hard. I'm going to go, well, hey, look, I had a recording session and set up, and I was going to plan on doing this, but no, tonight, after the way this came up, and I'm even getting goosebumps thinking about it now, I need to record this. I
Right.
don't care what I had planned before. And again, it's like following that,
Mm-hmm.
allowing it to pull you through that experience. Consequently, that song ended up being one of my biggest radio airplayed
Isn't that
songs.
incredible? I'm going to tell you something,
Yeah.
and I'm going to, and this is, and we talked about it. You know how certain people. I mean, we have capacities of all kind of doing similar things, but you said the passion. I started playing piano when I was 8 years old, all the way till I was 16, and the teenage thing got in the way. And of course, as you know, more practice. In other words, but it was, yeah, I did it and I liked it, but it was more my mom. Like, you know what I'm saying? I didn't have what you're talking about. you know it to me, as I was progressing, that it demanded more practice, more time spent in the music. Was like, oh my god. And I couldn't grow my fingernails, because my teacher, she'd be like, no, you can't cut those fingernails. And I was like, oh, to a teenage girl. But do you see what the difference is? It was like, I liked it, but there was no passion in it for me. Okay.
Well, and you know what? Hearing you talk about your plants and the trees that you're
Yes.
growing and the things that's the same kind of passion.
Right.
It's just been channeled in a different way, and that's still
Well,
beautiful.
no, let me tell you
It's
something. My
still,
passion has always been writing. I mean, I have, you have hobbies and passions, but for me, it's writing. And I've been doing that ever since, God, I learned, once I learned how to read when I was like 7, like actual reading. I would bug my mom to take me to the library every week and take out the 10 books that they would allow me. Nobody ever had to, like, Marlene, to me, that's why I'm saying I understand. But as far as the music part, yeah, people learn how to play instruments, and it wasn't even for lack of practice, because I did practice and I went through it 8 years. But it's not like what you just described about your creation process.
you know what it was, it was being on the farm.
Okay.
And maybe in a way, here, let me explain to myself as somebody that struggled greatly with disability of dyslexia, which now I see is actually a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it really allows that problem, which they say I have, allows for 3D spatial comprehension, or the ability to change perception.
Okay.
And that means my imagination is extremely vivid. And the
Okay.
things that I remember that are so impregnating in me are the passionate moments that I remember sharing with family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
So with growing food, people would be like, well, I don't know how to grow food. It's hard work. I hate pulling
Yes.
weeds. All the different things that go on with the drudgery of the
Mm-hmm.
work aspect of it. But all of that is outweighed
Yes.
by those moments of victory and your tactical relationship to, I have created abundance with my hands and
Yes.
my strength and my ability and my patience and my conscience. And
Yes.
inside of that, I remember, like, my dad, you know, holding up gourds and things that he had grown,
Mm-hmm.
like it was like a cherub, and this corona like
Yes.
discharge coming off of him because of his pride of
Yes.
doing what he did.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes. And I
and I and
totally
I
get
saw
it.
that in my mom. I saw that in my brothers and sisters, especially my brother, and my grandparents, and some of my uncles and my grandfather. They always said to me, I don't care what it is that you do, just so
Yes.
long as you're passionate about it. You could be
Yes.
a shoe salesperson, you could be an
Uh,
astrophysicist. I don't care what it is.
and let
Just
me
be
tell you
passionate
something.
about
When
it.
you are there, don't get me wrong, and a lot of people confuse this. You do not have to be yeah, there's days that you're like, oh my God, wow. And like what you said, and I'm going to say the farming, I also raise chickens. I call myself a chickenista. Okay. I,
I love
nobody,
it.
nobody has to tell me to get up at 6 in the morning. And everybody, my audience already knows. In a little while, the sun's going down. You're going to hear all my roosters crow because everybody. And then I have my young ones that crow at the oddest moment because they don't know any better. But anyway, and to me, it's like no hardship to go out there and to search them down and to do this. And every once in a while, I find myself talking to the chickens, and I'm like, okay, they're all right, whatever, as long as they don't answer back. But in other words, but nobody ever has to tell me, hey, go take care of your chickens, man. They're going to starve. Or, hey, are you No, you go out there and you're like, and when they hatch chicks, it's like I hate to say it, I'm going to sound like such a dweeb. Oh, they're so cute. They're so beautiful. Oh my God. Like, and it's like, I love it. It's like, no, and there's pride, like what you were describing.
That's passion and pride, and there's nothing dweeby about it. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You can't buy that. You can't.
No, exactly.
That's the living experience of and the tactical, like I said,
Yes.
relationship with your living environment.
Yes.
It's so important.
Yes, and it's one of those things that, like you said, it's the passion. Nobody, to somebody else that maybe has to do it for a living or because, hey, they got to. It's like, okay, I got to do this because I have to, because whatever. Either I'm going to sell this. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with selling. That's not a bad aspect to it. But they kind of do it because, God, they got to, or otherwise the consequences of it are more work.
Right.
And I understand the practical aspects of things too. Don't get me wrong. But for me, it's like, and what you said, it's not like, nah, you don't have to, I'm not under threat of, oh my God, this is going to unravel if I don't take care of it, or my animals, or the plants, or the trees, or whatever,
Well, and that sense of heritage through that act.
Yes.
Like with a family like up here and where I live in farming community in Ontario, some of the family farms have been running here for like 120 years.
Yeah, but see that, and I can imagine if sometimes I'm like, and I have, like I say, a micro farm. I can imagine sometimes, and I tell everybody, you think of, or you hear about farmers, obviously, farming and farmers, but not till you try to do it on a very small plot of land. Do you kind of start getting the idea of what's involved in actual farming? By the way,
bingo.
I used to
and that's actually a really healthy community-related aspect.
Let me tell you something. I used to look at the weather report to see if it was raining, so it make sure I could go to the beach. Now I wake up, the first thing I look at is what's the weather? What's the precipitation percentage?
Well, that's because do I have to water tonight, right? That's
or it's like, man, it's great.
Right.
I got water. No, let me tell you something. It always when you're farming, unless you're flooding, then that's different. But over the bad part is when you don't have enough water coming in. That you got to supply water.
Yeah,
somehow.
Absolutely.
That's where you're in big trouble. But yeah, and it's so funny because before I did any of this, Ed, I would have been like, okay, I understand the concept of farming, okay, but now I get it. I really do get it.
Well, that's the thing I was saying. And when it becomes something that you personally take on, because, and this is where I'm a big proponent of agriculture being a part of education, especially early education, because when you get kids involved, and I've seen how excited kids can be about the prospect of creating something that's going to sustain them and maybe even make a little money on the side with a vegetable stand, or selling jam or jelly or chutney or some relish or something like that. That all changes. And again, just like you said, it reevaluates what it really takes in order to make food happen. It's not just the show up at the grocery store to the trough and I'm just buying and I'm not thinking about the consequences of where things are coming from, how they're, where, how, who, all of those things that are so important to know. And like I was going to say before, with a bigger farm, and you have 200 acres, that's where the harder side of like
Oh
it being
yeah.
the practical tactical of making it work to be
Yes.
a viable commodity, to be sustainable, then
Yes.
all the trials and tribulations that go on with the 21st century as far as
Mm-hmm.
farming is concerned, what it costs to actually run a farm. People
Yes.
then end up saying, well, why do it? Because I think it's a moral obligation
Yes. Yes.
in order to be able to provide good quality food to your
Absolutely.
community, right?
People don't understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I also have bees. I have a bee sanctuary here. I have a very small apiary.
Wow.
And I have here
Wow.
another son of mine, my philosopher. He has a smaller apiary at another property, so he's so that's another thing that you understand firsthand, as far as the ecosystems and all that stuff. What you were talking about as far as when it's not a manufactured on demand kind of process, when it's like you're relying on your efforts and whatever the land is, like that you give and it gives you back, and then you lend a hand, like watering it, stuff like that.
Hey,
So
you're talking about apiarists and bees, and that
yes,
realization too of the importance of cross
the
pollination. Otherwise, no
yes,
fruits.
no fruits,
I remember one
yes.
year with the decline of the bee population that was happening in Ontario, and in some ways it may be on a little bit of an incline, but I was actually going out with a feather
Mm-hmm.
and going from blossom to blossom,
Right.
acting like a bee to artificially cross pollinate my squash and a bunch of different things that were like the
I hadn't
bigger
heard of
leaf
that, but let me
plants.
tell you something. I've been really lucky, even though we had a couple of times where, because out here in South Florida, we have a big problem with mosquitoes, and they fumigate. They're not supposed to fumigate during the daytime when the bees are out. They're supposed to do it only at night. But we had a big kill off of bees, and I know they took samples and they took them over to like the state capitol because they wanted to find out, because they suspected somebody had been fumigating for mosquitoes during the daytime, which is like, uh, but yeah, people don't understand how important. All my farming neighbors, I live in a rural area. I've got a lot of people out here growing stuff. They're,
Nice.
basically they're getting the benefits of an apiary without paying for the apiary. I don't care about my bees.
What part of South Florida are you in?
I'm in deep southwest Dade, almost by the entrance to the Keys. This has historically been an agricultural area. The East Coast on the beach is the beach.
Right.
That's where all the hotels and all that stuff was going on. But if you went out further west into Dade County from the turn of the century, the 1910s, the 1920s, this
Hmm.
is where they grew a lot of the stuff, especially when the rest of, when they started doing the orange stuff and the oranges, or other parts of the country, they were snowed under. Well, they could still
Right.
grow stuff here, which is what they do. Like, a lot of tomatoes, even though the orange industry got kind of decimated here in Florida because of disease. Now it's starting to make a comeback. But yeah, out here historically has been an area where they did a lot of growing of foods, tomatoes, pole beans, corn. And as a matter of fact, not
Yeah.
far from here, I've got this one railroad track that ran all the way through the state, which is how, you know, back then you would load your stuff up on they would have like a little depot, and this is
Transport.
transport, get the stuff out. But yeah, yeah. So yeah, this is
Wow.
store.
Wow.
So I mean, we went off the paranormal, but yes, and you know what? I understand what you're saying as far as in your own family. Let me ask you something. How long has your family been then on that piece of land? For a long time then, or
We were from 1935 up until 2006.
okay, that's a
And
long
it
time.
was a long, long time. And we had 6 barns. We had 1,500 cattle. My mom and dad were bringing blonde d'Aquitaine, which was the first time that cow had ever come into Canada back in the 1970s. We had an embryo transplant center where my mom and dad were doing embryo transplants for
Really?
recipient animals. My dad was the mayor of Markham for 30 years. He was also chairman of York Region. He was the police commissioner, and he was the first federal coalition MP ever in the history of Canadian federal
Did they
politics.
get a chance to sleep? I mean, that's
No, my
that's
dad died my dad died a young man. He died at the
really.
age of 55 of a brain tumor that he
That's a
actually
shame.
should have died from at the age of 4 or 5. It's called a cardoma, and the fact that he even lived with it all of his life was unbelievable.
Really. That's very
Yeah,
sad
so
to hear that, but
it
sad,
is,
but
and
I,
it has this weird connectiveness in my thinking to the chance factor of existence,
okay.
because my dad was one of the most healthiest skeptics that you could ever meet as a result of him just being pragmatic and being,
Mm-hmm.
publicly minded.
Right.
So that's sort of where that part of me kicks in,
Right.
and it starts to evaluate things, and those kinds of things, when they were hard to discount with my dad,
Right.
scared the hell out of him.
Right. Because if he's,
And
yeah, exactly.
it shatters the paradigm, like you were talking about again.
Yeah.
And for me, when I hearing or seeing, I'm sorry, Dad, I love you, that sense of fear that you had brought affirmation to the story,
Right.
because you couldn't skeptically or sort of pragmatically think your way through it. And
Right.
again, it sort of brought that sense of confirmation to me for so many different things that happened in my own life.
Right. And you know what? Sometimes also, and you mentioned, let me ask you something. Did your dad, did he know that he had that tumor only till the end of his life, or did he know about it before? He didn't. He
He
didn't know
developed
about it.
multi, he developed multiple sclerosis at a very young age, and then
Okay.
started to really decline at about 52. And then when they thought that the multiple sclerosis had something to do with this visual distortion and problems with his eye,
Right.
they realized that he had a tumor on his optical nerve. And when they did the surgery, they realized that it had a stem that connected to the center of his brain, which was hooked to his hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and pineal gland. So there was no way to operate on it. But what was
Right.
really wild is that after the operation, because he couldn't walk because the multiple sclerosis,
Right.
see or anything, he started walking again, and everything
Really.
seemed to be fine for like almost 3 weeks. And then about 3 days before he died, I remember he was just in a trans state of being like he knew he was going to die. Looking
Right.
back now, as I was so young, I didn't really understand what was going on. The doctors were like, "He's fine. Everything seems to be good," and then he was gone. So
But you know
I
what? My
now,
point is that you know that saying, ignorance is bliss, almost
yeah,
like, despite, if, in other words, if for some reason they would have ever identified when he was a child that he had that, maybe the prognosis would have been, oh no, well, any minute now. So it's almost like
right.
he didn't know about it. It was like, and he, yeah, he died
And
relatively
in the
young.
weirdest of ways, what he actually accomplished as a person
Yes, exactly,
is staggering. I mean,
exactly.
he was even drafted by the Toronto Argonauts, major NFL football team, CFL football team, and the Argos, or Hamilton Tiger Cats, because he was such a good football player. He was an
Wow.
amazing running back. So he had all this crazy potential, and philosophically, his ideas about politics, and I hate using that word because he referred to himself as a public servant,
Mm-hmm.
were staggering. I'm actually in the process of writing a documentative grouping of notes and a journal about him to put together a full-on documentary about his life as a public servant, not just to illustrate what he had
Mm-hmm.
achieved in those positions, but more so to outline what that philosophy really represents. Because today politics has become, other than in a municipal sense, which is really
Mm-hmm.
where people are really connected to their political living environment,
Yes.
federally and on a state and or provincial level, there's a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
And my dad was privy to and saw a lot of that.
Yes.
And this was back in the 80s. It hasn't
Right,
gotten
right.
much
Like
much
you
better.
go into that public to do public service, maybe with these high ideals, and then you have a reality check moment, like, huh?
Right,
Realizing
right.
you might be the only one, or maybe one of a few that is very idealistic about your intentions,
Right.
and then you
And that's
find
the
out.
thing. I
Yeah.
think that through public lobbying groups and other sort of agendas and things like that, it really destroys the potential for those kinds of things to occur. He did more probably for York Region as an independent, never crossed the floor, even though he was asked to so many times in those 4 years than probably most people did. And again, he I love my dad, and one of those people that for why I do what I do today. because if you notice, you're reading musician, gentleman, farmer.
Yes.
I like the idea of diplomacy and
Yes.
the ability to disagree and agree,
Yes, of
or
course.
we disagree, and but come through it without it being related to character
Oh, yes,
assassination, and
absolutely.
healthy conversation. And that's where this world can be very difficult to navigate, because
Yes.
some people immediately call it in critical thinking. You guys are crazy. You're just seeing things.
Right.
What are you up to? Da 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 da. You don't
Oh,
know
of
what you're talking
course.
about.
Of course. And
So
and that's, sometimes I think that's very limiting, which is unfortunate.
yeah,
But let me tell you something though. Your dad sounds like, wow, he considering everything that, you know, when how some people in a short amount of time they do so much, and then there's other people that have this years and years, and when they look back, they're like, okay, you played it safe all along, too safe. Don't get,
too safe.
yeah,
Yeah,
to say yeah, that's a, but no, they kind of talk themselves out of anything, including,
right.
the, doing all these things like what you described that your father did. That's
Well, I guess it's
incredible.
the struggle that makes us stronger, really, in
Yes.
essence. Otherwise, without it, we become very
Yeah, that's
weak and
right.
complacent, right?
Fear
And
of failure
even
stops a lot
feel
of people.
failure, right? It's even like trying to articulate some of these stories.
Yes.
It has that same sort of connectiveness to it, and thinking about it, like, do I say something, or do I just not say anything
Right.
and let it go by the wayside?
Oh,
But
you know what?
it,
Yes, I've pointed this out, because every time that there's some, whether you want to talk about ghosts or UFOs or cryptids or weird stuff, or I say, you know what? Yes, especially when there's, you look at, let's say Bigfoot. Let's go with Bigfoot, okay, or cryptid or
right,
whatever. You have people, and I say, okay, you know what? Yes, there's the people that are lying. Absolutely, there's the people that are lying. There's people that are, they think that what they saw is that, but it might not be. But they really do believe it. They're not lying. They just believe it. And I say, and then there's of course the people that actually did see something. And I said, but for all the, which means there's a good portion of these reports that are accurate. I said, but for all those people, there's a slew that never say anything.
that's right.
Why? Because they're wigged out themselves. Plus, they don't even want to go through some of the stuff that they put people through. That people look at you funny, or like, hey, you've been drinking, or hey, what? So I say those
Or
are
what?
just the what,
Or what have you got to gain from this
right.
story?
Exactly, exactly. Oh yeah. So what? You're gonna write a book about this or something like that? You know how people are always on
Well,
the
and I think your point is so strong, because how many people out there that have had some sort of an experience, and you're mentioning cryptids,
mm-hmm.
and they can't explain or articulate the occurrence. I had an experience myself, which was
Okay.
a number of years ago, and um, without being too long-winded in the story, my attention was called to the field in the early evening, and we have a 40-acre parcel behind me that leads into a forest. My dog was with me. I was going to the garden.
Okay.
I had heard coyotes that were going kind of crazy, and the coyotes had chased my dog a number of times back to the house. It's been kind of
Okay.
close call a couple of times. Put him
Okay.
back in the house, start walking into the field, and the field comes to a rise,
Uh huh.
and then it declines on like a 20-degree pitch for a great deal
Okay.
of distance. As I get to the top of the hill, I see this dark figure standing, which in my mind, I'm seeing somebody wearing a balaclava and a jumpsuit looking at the forest where the coyotes are, but the coyotes won't come out of the forest, but they're yipping and going crazy. Now,
Okay.
usually you don't hear that kind of activity from coyotes until late at night when they're involved
Okay.
in some kind of an altercation with a coyote or something else like a raccoon, or, they're fighting or hunting. This thing was large. I now, in retrospect, maybe say 6.5, almost 7 feet tall. It crouched down. It came alarmingly fast out of this brush line after I'd lost sight of it, on all fours. It was standing erect on 2 feet when I saw it. My first impression was, what is a person doing wearing a balaclava and a dark jumpsuit
Uh
in the
huh.
middle of July at the bottom of my field?
Right.
It it lunged like this crazy, like bipedal man rabbit,
Okay.
stood up on 2 feet, turned to its left, and started walking half of this parcel, which was 25 acres, about that, into the bush line and disappeared. Now, in that process of observing what I was observing, I was more terrified than I had been with a black bear experience that I've had when I've been camping. I had a problem trying to describe to people what it
Uh-huh.
was that I had seen. I was filled with questions. I
Yes.
reached out to a number of different wildlife biologists, including reputable people that walk both territories between something that may be paranormal or cryptid and actual, like, reputable biological research. They turned me on to a group of researchers that came up here, documented my whole thing. I put out a little tiny video about it all, but
Okay.
I still don't know what
What
I
it
saw.
was.
I know that it scared me enough that I wouldn't go back to the forest by myself again for at least 6 months.
Uh-huh.
I'm still trying to process the event because of how afraid it made me.
And you're
So in
seeing
my
even the predators, which the coyotes are were wigging out. They're
they're
like,
wigging out too.
yeah. So you're part of you's thinking like what you said. What's going on? Normally they don't do this in the middle of the day.
Right, and usually when I'm talking about an experience that has happened to me, because I've had a lot of interesting things that have occurred. People are like, oh, come on, Ed, like, what? It's a bear. Just a, but when I talk to people that I know that are hunters, and I'm like, Bill, a good friend of mine, he's been hunting for years. Bill, have you ever seen a black bear do this? No. Have you ever come across a black bear in the bush before? Yes, but they keep pretty much to themselves. Have you ever seen it walk on two legs for like a half, 25 acres? No. Can a circus bear do that? Can a circus bear walk for 25 acres on 2 feet after running bipedally or quadrupedally, excuse me? So then I start doing research and I go, like you said, people, do they tell these stories? Well, apparently this area, all the way for another probably 150 miles north of me, have had occurrences that have been happening for, well, since the 1920s, about people reporting strange incidents of seeing things, hearing things, running into like tracks, all sorts of stuff. Another incident that occurred with four people that were in a car that were driving north a couple years before my experience, reported seeing a large jackrabbit-sized man running beside their car, so much so that they slowed the car down because they thought that they were going to run into it. All of these
Wow.
kinds of things start adding up, and I'm going, so what did I see? I don't know
Yes.
what I saw, but what I saw points me to this thinking, and it pointed me to fear for the
Sure.
longest time because I was worried.
Of
I was
course.
terrified.
Of course. And this is not like, because there's people that go out into the woods precisely looking to have an encounter. Here you're not. You're
Yeah,
just taking a walk. It's
and
like,
why your statement is so profound, because how many people that have actually had those kinds of experiences, that all of that is going through them cerebrally.
yes.
Who do I tell? How do I tell it? Are they going to believe me? I was terrified. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to process it.
Yeah.
They can't do it.
I'll just shut up
If
and not talk about this.
Right, and or just or and to think that ridicule will be,
Yeah.
paramount. So it's like, okay, I'm going to discount it too. I don't know what I saw.
Well, most of them will think if I heard this from somebody else, I'd be the first one going, man, you're so full of it. I don't believe
Right,
that. They kind of put that, they have that back and forth, that shadow boxing with their own personality. Thinking, man, if I
right.
heard this from somebody else, I'd be like, oh, yeah, right. Okay.
But see, but when you have those natural experiences where
Yeah.
things are so magical and majestical, like, so I'm working in the garden one day, I hear all this grass moving behind me, and humming and buzzing. You know where I'm going with this, maybe.
Uh
And
huh.
all of a sudden, I stand up, I turn, I look over my shoulder, and I see an entire swarm of bees coming out of the field. And what are
Okay.
they doing? They're following a queen to a new location.
Yes, they're swarming.
And
Okay.
I immediately I start to, like, lose it, because I'm like, what am I seeing here? I can't believe I'm watching this kind of. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it now, and to be witness
Uh
to this
huh.
kind of beautiful event is akin to those
Yes.
same kind of frequency experiences that I've had in the paranormal. Or like
Mm-hmm.
when you've been on the front of a boat, and you're cresting little small waves, and all of a sudden tons of dolphins come in and they start
Yes.
following the boat, and you're having that sort of subtle interaction with them. It's that
Yes.
subtle energy feeling that,
Yes.
like I said, is akin to those paranormal experiences when they occur, because you're lucky enough to be able to witness it and to pay attention to it and conscious
Yes.
enough of it to be a part of it.
And you know what, Ed? I think that something that you saying is something that I myself, I'm guilty of it. And it's living the experience in the moment, in the now. Because unfortunately, a lot of people, myself included, we get addicted in a way to that multitasking. You're here, but you're already thinking, well, you know what? And today I gotta, do that. But what you're describing that's that moment. Everything stops except the experience of that moment, which
Yeah.
becomes more and more rare, because we're always on the fast track of, what's next, and I gotta do this and I gotta do that, and a to-do list. So yes, and I think once
It seems to be like you said too in those moments.
well, technology, unfortunately, I think has done that to us, up to a certain point. Because I tell
Yeah.
everybody, I remember once upon a time when you had one landline in your house, and that was it. No answering machines.
Three TV stations.
Right, three
Three
TV
TV stations.
stations, and no, of course, no phones, no, not even answering machines. It was like people would send you a letter, and you'd expect
Hello? Who's
you
there?
knew, right? If you called and nobody answered, you'd call back later.
Right.
Nowadays
Right.
everybody's like, "Hey, I called you. Why didn't you answer?"
But see, that's where the 247 existence is
Yeah.
so on all the time that it's
Yes.
really hard to focus on that. And in your potency in your statement is that it's hard to even say in the moment of the death experience where we're all focused now. Every life is shut off for a little while because we're going through the experience of it going, everything that's happening, and work has maybe changed, our schedule has changed, maybe we're not interacting with the everything like you were just saying. It's that creature of habit mentality, and then you start to witness and experience these other kinds of things. It's so hard in the 21st century not to be thinking about multitasking all the time
Yes.
and to go, know what? No, I got 6 hours of devoted time to
Yes.
just experiencing. And
Yes.
it's even hard to do that, to shut your mind off, because you're thinking, well, after that 6 hours, maybe I should go and do this. And then I have
Right.
this to do tomorrow, and da da da. And you already recharging your
Yes.
thinking process with the not, as
Yes.
opposed to the now, right?
Yes.
So
and the
I
now
think that,
kind of moves past us, and you never catch it. You never stop. You never do what you just described when you saw the bees.
right. And then like you said, and they're far few between it now. And I remember sometimes these experiences being even seemingly accelerated when I was younger, because there weren't all the things of responsibility and all the other things that are like continually having to play. I got to do this. I got to do this. This bill has to get paid. This has to get done. Da, da, da,
Sure.
da, da. So
You remember when
that's
you
why
were
I
a
think
kid and
also,
somebody told you this will take a year, and you'd be like, a year?
oh yeah, what are you
God,
talking about?
that'll be forever. That
And
might
now
as be
it's
the next
like,
century. A year? Okay, sure.
yeah, now it's
That's
like, what do
nothing.
you mean it's September? What are you
Yeah,
talking about,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. And it
You
was
know,
like, yeah, because when you were a kid, you were living more in the now. You were living
and the
in the
kids
now. Yeah.
and children, I think, are extremely susceptible because they are more in the now, and they
Yeah.
allow the doorway of imagination and the possibility of what if to occur. So they're more susceptible to paying attention to, could it happen? Will it happen? They
Yeah.
aren't as yet conditioned by so many of the
Yes.
dogmatic practices that we all deal with on a daily
Yes.
basis that
Yes.
makes us go, no, it can't be that. It can't be that.
Yeah.
It
Yeah, I know.
can't,
It's
but it
crazy.
is.
It is,
But it
and
is.
a lot, and I want to be perfectly honest with you. The only ones that appreciate it are people that have lived an X amount of years. As in pre beepers, pre cellular phones, pre technology computers. It's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm pro technology, but at the same time, I've seen the downside of it as well.
We're on the same page.
And not everybody, unless you've lived X amount of years, can get it. So, and
Right.
another thing that I tell everybody, I've been doing paranormal investigations since the 1990s, and I said this is around the time
Wow.
that you had to pay to develop film. Remember? And people are like, well, yeah, you had to. You mean you? No, yeah, you had to develop film and pay for it, even if all you got was a black photograph. Yeah. And no, and none of these other
Drop
stuff
them
that
off
you
at
see.
the grocery store,
Yeah, or
right?
the grocery or whatever. Yeah, this was
Photomat.
photo mat. Yes, yes. A lot of those, believe it or not, a lot of those people that process film saw a lot of funky stuff when they
I believe
process.
I believe it. I believe, but you're right. How much money was spent because you had to
Yeah.
process and pay for that film. Now you have a phone. You could have almost a terabyte of space where you could store
Well,
information.
if you ever
It's just
print
like
it, it's going to be the perfect picture because before you even print it, you can enhance it and crop it and whatever, and you
yeah.
know, you know
You don't
that.
have to wait for the moment.
No, exactly, and that's I tell everybody, as far as paranormal investigations, because nowadays you get all these millions of gadgets and stuff and crap. I know there's investigators that people drag around with them to investigations, and I say, you know what? Once upon a time, it was much simpler because, and again, I know part of it is in that attempt to capture proof. We want to produce proof, whether it's
Yeah.
an EVP or the photograph or the film, and everything. And then I think, okay, but when you have your own personal experience, like what you described, Ed, which is like, you know what? If nobody ever believes me, I know what I experienced. Let's say what happened when your friend passed away. Okay,
Right.
that there was a thing like, hey, if I can never prove this to anybody, I know what I feel inside of myself is something
Right.
that I'm not making up because I want it to be so. There's a synchronicity here that is, I want to say, is being manipulated by my friend from the other side. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? We all have had, in many ways, something in some way that has occurred, or know somebody that something has occurred,
Yes.
and to some, they still may discount it, but that's the food. That's kind of like the amusement park of wow, of reality.
Yes.
Because it means that there's this interconnectedness to so many different things. And
Yes.
you were talking before about talking to your chickens. Well, I think that's amazing because, like, I talk to my plants, and
I talk to
I
my
think
plants
that
too.
whatever the symbiotic relation is on a subtle
Yes.
energy level, I feel it.
Yes.
I
Yes, you
don't
do.
for imparting these stories, whether it makes somebody, and I hope not, go, well, I want Ed's stories. I don't want you to have my stories. My experiences are my experiences because they are mine. You have yours. And the
Yes.
same thing with, like, I don't care if you think I'm crazy because I talk to my tomatoes. I'm getting something out of it.
Right. Yeah.
And and,
Exactly.
and,
Exactly.
and, and really, in like what you say, you've embraced technology. So have I. Here we are talking today on these
Yes.
crazy machines,
Absolutely.
right? And you've got the
Exactly.
amazing cat ears on that are glowing again. But you
Yes.
also realize that it's a
Yes.
tool.
Yes.
And like tools of yesteryear, carpenters didn't go to bed with their hammers.
Yep.
But people today, technology is so integrated into everything that we
Mm-hmm.
do, it's pretty
Yes.
hard to stay away from it.
Oh yeah.
And again, I think it's healthy to cut the proverbial umbilical cord so that you can have those kinds of tactical experiences to your living environment because they enrich it so greatly. And
Oh.
again, I want people to have their own experiences because they are living, sentient, human experiencers inside of the experience,
Mm-hmm.
experiencing. So why shut yourself off to all of those different things? Even as mundane as it may seem to somebody else, it has great consequence to your living moment.
Sure.
That
Exactly.
and that's what feeds into the positivity of the everything,
And you know what?
if
And
you
and,
will.
and I'm gonna ask you because you're a musician and you understand performance. And I want to say that unfortunately also that's part of society. Some people, which are not performers by the way, always want to be performing. In other words, they're trying to live their life like if they were on their own sort of a reality show and they have a camera and it's like, oh, that would be stupid, or in other words, they're always like if they had a magical invisible camera on them all the time, besides the selfie stuff. And it's like, stop it, because like you said, I don't care if anybody thinks I'm weird or stupid because I talk to my tomato plants, but there's some people out there that are like, oh no, that just, no, that's, like they're always on camera even if they're not. It's like, step out of it. What are you
Right,
doing? So of course
right,
they're
but
never going to see what's going on around them because they're too caught up in having that Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up moment. It's like, yeah,
and
they don't, go ahead.
or having some sort of a clinicalized version of what they really have the potential to be.
Yes. Yes.
The facial apps and body morphing apps, which like are
Yes.
tweaking cheekbones and
Oh
eyebrow
yeah.
lines and waistlines and butts and everything else.
Yeah.
There are beautiful people all over the world that don't need a machine to tell them how to look.
Right.
And that Mr. DeMille moment that you're talking about, that you said, it's like, I mean, well, who are you trying to impress? Yourself? Is this become a part of the
Right.
triumph of the ego? Or are
Yes.
we in a decline of something, or are we embracing something in an unhealthy way?
Right.
Uh, I could hit a person over the head with a telephone, and an old telephone, for that matter, would have to
Yes.
be, and create some damage. But I could also call somebody and make them feel better.
Yes.
Um,
Of
so,
course.
how do we choose to use this? And there's this hurry up and do it. Look
Yeah.
what's new. I
Yeah.
can't believe you can do this. This is in the weirdest of ways, which has really changed the cosmetic and of the music industry in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the way not only we create it, but the
Right.
way people actually interact with it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that again has you sit around and question, well, where's that tactical relationship to somebody actually, buying a record and putting it on at home and maybe having some people come over
Right.
and
Exactly.
listen to it together and talk about the lyrics and where did this song come from, and
Yeah.
it becomes a communal experience.
Yes.
And now we've gone from, like, hey, we used to have to develop film. $300 for a 2-inch Ampex roll on a big 24-inch machine, just for 15 minutes.
Wow.
Now I have an unlimited amount of space to be able to record forever if I
Yes.
wanted to.
Yes. And that's the upside
All
of
of
it.
that is right, but how do we choose to utilize it is the most important thing.
Exactly. Well, it's
Right.
almost like a quid pro quo. What have you given up in exchange for that? Okay, authenticity, spontaneity, or the downtime to experience the now, which is okay. Now I might be doing something goofy, or might not look my best, or my makeup is off, and my hair is like this, or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's fine because I'm experiencing the now. What and I
But
think that a lot of people that escapes them.
here's the thing, okay? I could put it into this context, I guess. If I am in a process of writing,
Mm-hmm.
like you understand this, and you're going through stuff and you're jamming with ideas in your head and you're playing with word ideas and how do you really want to express this and all this different kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you go, wait a second, but and then you're like, okay, yeah, and then but no, instead of finally I want to use all of this, and you connect, click click
Right.
click, the chills go up. Yes, this is what I was searching for and I didn't
Yes.
even know it.
Yes.
Or could I go on, grab an app, look through different phrases and catch lines,
Yeah,
look
I
at the
know.
machine, flip it for me, give me a thesaurus of the ideas,
Yes, I know.
instead of lieu of personal discovery. It
Yes.
outweighs it for me in that way, and then it
No.
removes that sense of magic that we're
Yes.
talking about and have been talking about the whole show.
Yes.
So I think it can be really detrimental, and at the same
Well,
time really positive, because look, man, you and I are rapping here right now with these silly
yes.
machines,
But
so
see,
it's
but
pretty
there's
cool.
and when you get into, but see, it serves a purpose. But then when I'm done talking to you, guess what? I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna put my chicks away. You know what I'm
I
saying?
gotta go water, I gotta
Right?
go
It's like,
water.
it's like, and but what I'm saying is, it serves a purpose, and I think at the end of that, somehow or other, whenever, whatever the case might be, whether it's technology or whatever, anything that cuts us off from a spirituality, or what you call the connection to the divine, however it is you find it. Everybody's got their own way to that. That always usually works against you in the long run. Okay, whether it's because you're distracted, and sometimes people do this on purpose, they distract themselves with all these different things. Okay, and then at the end of the day, it's like, then I'll fall into bed and just pass out, and then I'll wake up the next day and it's like, hurry, 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 yeah, you might be distracting yourself, but you're also losing out on a lot of now moments. That yeah, and I hate to say it, but we're multitasking our lives away sometimes.
You're right. And that's why these moments that have occurred for people have that repunctuating moment. Even today, talking about it with you, which has been so wonderful, discussing
Likewise.
those experiences for me re-amplify the divine. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're using that word, and I don't use that word lightly, because to
Mm-hmm.
me it's not about being higher or greater than something.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually participating in something that is so beautiful it's hard to describe even. And I'm humbled by those experiences.
Sure.
I'm not there to grab at it in a way to take its energy.
Yeah.
I stand like a child, humbled in the moment of experience. And
Right.
for me, that doing that, as because we know we cannot help but go through these paces of the digital age, as we're pointing out,
Mm-hmm.
it recalibrates me. You're
Sure.
talking about going to deal with the chickens later. I'm talking about going to water,
Yeah.
but that's where I'm going to be like, my mind opens up differently.
Yes.
I'm thinking differently. I
Yes.
may be filling buckets or working with something from the water barrels or whatever, but then I'm back at the plant, and as I'm doing whatever, my mind is going through all these other things that are
Yes.
completely detached from that. So
Yes.
I see that as, again, one of those humbling moments. I'm
Yes.
lucky that
Yes.
I can have those feelings and moments.
Yes. And I know that sometimes, don't get me wrong, I understand that sometimes people have demands on their time which are inescapable. In other words, it's not a choice. They have to. And I get it. I
Right.
get it. But I think also a lot of us are moved along to, hey, you know what? Let's say you got the 9 to 5, and then you go to and you binge on your favorite show, for the next 3 hours, like, and that's fine. But if that's all you do, and then by the time you know it, you go to sleep, and then you wake up the next day, and it's a rerun of, like, it's like, okay, I do that yesterday and the day before and the day before, and then all the now moments escape you as far as just going outside and watching the sunset. I know that sounds really corny, but
No, but it's not though.
it's like, yeah.
Again, it's living in the moment. I tell you what, if the person working the 9 to 5 comes home to binge watch their favorite cartoon,
Right.
and it gets them so excited that they turn around
Mm-hmm.
and start storyboarding something and develop
Yes.
our own cartoon and create the next Rick and Morty, then
That's
that's cool.
different. That's different.
That's different than just living the status quo of the Ferris wheel over and over again,
Yes.
because it's safe. And again, what are you experiencing? It's not corny to experience a sunset
Yes.
because you want to experience it. There's
Right.
nothing corny
Exactly.
about that. You don't go
Right.
like, "Hey man, that's corny. You want to go get a hot dog?" Or "That's corny. You want to eat watermelon."
Right.
That's corny that you're enjoying it.
Right, and that's the thing, and it doesn't have, and I'm going to say, a lot of people think, to have that aha moment, I have to travel to distant lands or have to go to the Grand Canyon, and then I'll have my, oh, nature. And it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't believe that you can have those aha moments, or that, like you say, that moment, just where you're at, wherever it might be. Yeah,
You'd be surprised. What's the old? Once in a while, you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it
yes,
right.
yes, yes. But a lot of times
Robert
people
Hunter.
say, I have to go and travel to distant lands, and then I'll have the epiphany, whatever. And now you can have an
Right.
epiphany in your living room, believe it or
Well, and
not.
you know what? Those living experiences can be cool in those regards and culturally, like, enriching in some ways. But ultimately, what has it done for your personal tactical connection to things? If you, like, for instance, say, go to Nepal and spend time in the Himalayas, and you're working with Sherpas and gurus and
Yeah.
different people that are like taking you around to understand the intimacy, and all of a sudden you become philosophically charged with a new type of existence, but then come back to the Western Hemisphere and fall back into the category of
Right. It's like,
everything.
okay, well, that was that was an
What the hell? What the hell's the point, right? Like, so
exactly, exactly.
sometimes those things, what is hip, right? Like the Tower of Power used to say.
Yeah, it's like, well, and I'm gonna get back real quick to something that you said about when you had that experience with whatever it is that you. With how long ago was that you saw that out there by the
Two,
fields?
2015.
2015. God, that's not too long ago.
No.
Well, I'm gonna tell my own, and I've never told this story. Back in 1984, I went out to Yellowstone. okay, to the Old Faith Hotel, which, by the way, after that, it's burnt down. That area had burnt down. And I remember we had gone in there in June, right after basically the snow had melted enough so you could actually go into the park. People don't realize that out there, even in June, there was still a lot of snow, and a lot of the roads until then they were impassable. So we go in there, we had rented a cabin, and I remember we had taken in my daughter, who was 6 months old. We had like one of those backpacks that, you slung over your shoulders.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
right before we go in there, we stopped at this little roadside, like a stand, kind of like a craft store where you could buy stuff. And we're talking to this really nice couple who lived there for years and years and years. And they're saying, well, yeah, every year we get tourists that get killed by bears, because they say they try to clear out the bears out of where the tourists usually run around in. And I know, she goes, normally by now they've cleared them out, but eventually some of them drift back in. I mean, of course, it's Yellowstone National Park. How can you keep... But anyway, we have this conversation, like one of those coincidental foreshadowing kind of deals. So we check in, we have a cabin, and these cabins are basically in the middle of the forest. We went to see Old Faithful, all these animals running around, the buffaloes, which nobody's scared of humans. And then we see off in the woods this big, tall... basically one of those places that you climb so you could look out. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
like a trail, and there's a very narrow trail leading into it. And I say, it's my husband, not my ex-husband, I said, hey, let's go out there, so we could see it. And he has my daughter on his back, and we're coming down this trail, and all of a sudden, I'm looking, and I see something that looks like red, like fur, like, when an animal scratches itself, it starts waving like that. Like
Yeah.
But when you're looking through pine trees and it's kind of got shadowy, it's not like an open field. It's like you've got shadows and big tall pines.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking and I'm like, man, what is that moving like that? That's a weird movement. Like, back and forth. And it was like a reddish brown. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. And whatever it was massive. It was massive, and it was sitting like in the middle of the trail that, as a matter of fact, led to that lookout tower. And
so you would have had to cross its path?
Yeah, it was like, and at this point, even then, I thought originally it was a bear. I think it was a grizzly. I think it's grizzlies or whatever. It was like a reddish brown, long fur, and I remember we left and we went to the office and we said, hey, you know what? We were going to that lookout tower by the cabins, and I think we saw a bear, and they're like, no, are you sure about that? Because we made sure, especially now that we've got an influx of people coming in because the snows have finally melted. We especially as close to the cabins and all the areas where the tourists, because normally what the lady was telling us is that the tourists that were getting attacked by bears usually were in the camping, and they would leave food out, or something that smelled, and then that would attract the bears and stuff like that. Which, as a matter of fact, is why I rented a little cabin. I was like, but when I said, no, we're by the cabins, and that trail that leads to the lookout tower, and I remember them like are looking at me like, lady, what are you talking about? I go, yeah. I go, I think it was a bear to this point. And they're like, no. We're pretty sure there's no bears out there. We would know. We made sure, especially now, and as close as to where the cabins are and where everybody's, there's no bears out there. To this point, Roman, I don't know, Ed. I don't know what I saw that was a scratching, or I saw the waving of the fur, because I didn't go any further. We had my daughter on with us, was 6-month-old, and we said, you know what? And I really didn't wig up because I thought it was a bear. I thought it was a bear. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I just had this conversation with these people outside, and they say people get killed all the time. And according to the authorities, there's no way it could have been a bear. Now, what it was, I don't know.
But you were afraid enough not to carry on to the tower.
Oh, no. Well, to me, first of all, I thought it was a bear, and I was thinking, man, this is really, my cabin is basically down a little bit over there. And it was huge. It was like sitting in the middle of the trail, like far off, and I could see it. And it was huge. And like I said, what caught my attention was the fur moving back and forth, like a reddish, brownish fur, long. And I thought, and when they told me, I was like, oh, what else is it gonna be besides a bear, And they're like, no, insistent. I mean, I didn't get closer. How's that? I wasn't like I'm gonna get closer to see what
Did
it
they
is.
send anybody out to investigate?
I
Did
don't
they
know if
send
they
anybody
did.
to?
I don't know if they did because we were like, okay, we're gonna stay away from that part of it. Like, I don't care what you guys are saying. I know what I saw, what we saw, because we both
Right,
saw it. Yeah, it's like I'm
right.
not gonna go there to find out. Maybe they
Well,
did.
and there have been reports in those areas of those kinds of
And it was
creatures, if you will.
right, and that's the thing. And then of course, getting back to what we were talking about, people that don't report it. Like I said, I reported it because I didn't think anything other than that it was a normal thing like a bear. You
Right.
know, Otherwise, if I would have thought it was anything else, maybe most probably I would have been like, I'm not going to say anything about this. This is 1984, where you know I'm going to get funny looks. Forget it. Let me just shut
Well,
up.
yeah, but here you're thinking too. You're going, okay, well, I should say something because in case there's other people out here, the park should know about
Right.
it.
Well, yeah, I'm
So
thinking, yeah, somebody gets
your
killed.
experience was robust enough to go back and tell people at the ranger station about what. So again, if you had an experience
Yeah.
that was like you couldn't understand it, and then you go back to the park ranger and tell them,
Yes.
look, we just saw something on 2 feet that we don't understand. Da, da, da,
Right.
da. It would have the same context to it. You're
Yes.
you're you're afraid. You don't want somebody else to be hurt. You need to tell
Right.
somebody about it. When I had my black bear experience up north, the very next morning I paddled across the lake and told the people at the
Yeah.
ranger station because I didn't want anybody to be in any
Of
kind of
course.
trouble.
Of course. Of
Um,
course.
so, uh, how many people, like you said, would have that experience, see something that they're like, "What the," and then not say anything because the park would think that they were like out of it or
Well,
something, right?
and like I said, it just so happened that because I had that conversation right before we went to the park, I immediately assumed that what I was looking at was a bear, because
Right.
they made that mention. And then later I was thinking, you know what? It's really funny because what they said usually is when people were because they asked us, well, you guys camping? But you got to be careful because every summer we get tourists that get killed because they leave food out and it brings the bears into their campsite, and blah 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 blah. And I was like, no, we're staying in the cabins. And I was like, hmm. But I spoke to a gentleman. His name is Jim Smith, and he runs the Alabama Bigfoot Society, and he's been running it since the 1970s. And he was
Well,
telling me a story where he says that people out in, where he's at, they will have sightings of things if they're driving along, for example, and they are so wigged out that they think it's a cryptid or Bigfoot that they call the cops because I guess they don't know what else to do. The police are
right,
like,
right.
what can we do? So they take these people over to see Jim. And he says he's had more than a few instances, especially when it's happened at night, where the people will say, "Sir," the cops are like, "Hey, Jim, we maybe you want to listen to their story." And he says people will tell him, "Sir, do you mind if we stay here until daylight? We don't want to leave during the nighttime." And what
Because they're so afraid.
he tells me, he goes, "Marlene, I really couldn't say what they saw or didn't, but they're scared enough about what they think they saw or what they saw that they're not wanting to leave until day breaks." And that speaks to
Yeah.
me. It's like, man, I'm not going back out there.
Well, and that's what I was getting at before. That fear factor is that you're trying to process, and you
Yes.
can't. and
Yes.
and immediately fight or flight kicks in. When I had my experience, I was trying to crawl away on my knees and then start almost going into a running position
Yes.
and looking over my shoulder trying to analyze what was going on. But it
Yes.
took me half a year to be able to go back to my own forest.
Let me ask you, did you ever hear any strange noises besides the coyotes? Any other weird noises or anything? Or because after a while, you're kind
Nothing.
of familiar, I imagine, with what noises come out of there as far as animals are
Right.
concerned.
Mm-mm. It was only the coyotes, and that's what drew my attention. I was just going to the garden to pull a few weeds, check on some stuff, see what was going on, and I heard the commotion.
Let me ask you, and
And
during all those years your family had the farm, anything happened to any of your animals? Unex-
no, you know what? Unexplained incidents with the cattle, never. But I mean, they would be a good litmus test for something being, out
right.
of whack. They would either be disturbed or something that would be going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the incident with the UFO in the barn, in the house, in the old farmhouse, my mom said that they did, brought nothing up of the cattle and there being an issue
Right.
with the cows in the barn. It was more or less them watching it, hovering for 5 minutes, trying to describe what it was that they saw, hover over the barn. And like my mom would use the analogy of like bouncing, like a bouncing ball following the landscape.
Oh.
So like it was follow the geography of the land somehow. And but no, I was that's the funny thing is that the animals were never really a part
Right.
of anything that was strange. It always seemed to be something very human related, and incidences that occurred like in those same moments. That's why your statement was so beautiful, was that where everything slows down as a result of either something that's traumatic or
Mm-hmm.
something that you're forced into this moment of like everything is calmed down for a little while,
Right.
and you're privy to those moments. So that's a great question, but I don't remember much of anything ever weird happening with animals on the farm or
Well,
them being
like what you said
upset.
about George Knapp, when he did that research at the Skinwalker Ranch, you know,
Right.
over there, if you go, based on the story he was saying, those last the last owners. Well, I know there's different owners, but the last family that was there, I think it was what was the Shermans or something. From the moment they got there, they were having experiences. And as a matter of fact, from what I understand, the last or present owners don't allow like nobody, not even people, let's say, wanting to make a documentary because so much of what was going on has like slowed down or totally stopped. In other
Really?
words, they're hoping to bring back a lot of the phenomena, which, when you hear the stories, they had everything going on there from sightings of cryptids, animal mutilations, UFO. I mean, everything was going on. And apparently, a lot of the phenomena had not stopped totally, but calmed down a lot. And they were hoping that by not allowing anybody else, not even somebody wanting to, like a documentary, nobody's allowed on there because of that. Uh,
Wow. So do they feel that all of that activity has chased that stuff away?
It almost sounds like it. And I remember, I did look up. I did do a little bit of research back in the 1950s where they had UFO sightings. There was paper, like a little newspaper article, and it was a gentleman who was a high school teacher. He was a native of that little area in Utah where they're based out of, who basically saw some type of UFO phenomena. And later on, he documented more of it. But in other words, you know how sometimes they kind of, because somebody in modern times wants to make something out of a little thing and they make all these stories about. No, back since the 1950s, documented, there was sightings of something out there as far as like a UFO type of phenomena. And
Hmm.
then this family that moved into it, which I think they were there like 2 years, and then they stayed a little bit longer, but even though they had sold it because they convinced them, because they were trying to document all these experiences that they had from, I believe that family from, they had cattle. They had bought that piece of land to do cattle ranching.
Right, right.
And from the very first moment that they were there, they had an encounter with what looked like a really large, huge wolf that was very friendly towards them until it tried to take one of the calves they had with it. And the husband or the father, he tried shooting it and it wouldn't die. It was like when you
Whoa.
when you start reading this thing, you're like, what? And
Well,
that
here's the
was
other thing too, with the activity changing too, and this is why I'm also interested in the physical and or mathematical aspects to the possibilities of doorways being open, is that telluric currents, or what are also known as ley lines or
mm-hmm.
geomagnetic currents that run through the earth, are fluctuating and fluctuate and can move, change course, almost like a waveform. They can become stable for periods of time. Um, and is it something in that case that has changed as far as frequency, so it
Yes.
doesn't offer the same potential? I believe it was back in the 1970s at Berkeley College, and they performed some experiments with a magnetized room. The room itself was
Mm-hmm.
basically a huge conductor, and they carried out litmus test studies, just general topic conversational classes that would occur. And every class over the course of a month, they keep increasing the amount of magnetism that's in the room until people became agitated at
Yeah.
first, then started arguing with one another, and then it started to turn into seeing small flashes of light
Right.
and anomalies out of the corner of their eye. And then in a highly increased moment in time, people actually started seeing
Yes.
physical
Yeah.
things that they couldn't, dragon-like shapes and all sorts of
Yes.
interesting like occurrences. So I'm a big proponent of believing that sometimes locations themselves are like a
Yes.
receptor or I can't remember what it's called again. It's one of the types of jars they originally developed for like capacitors for
Right.
holding energy. And again, people themselves, you're talking about the families changing hands, they could be themselves the catalyst for a lot of that electrical activity
Sure.
just because of who they
Absolutely.
are as people. So
Well,
that's
the historically, from what I understand,
interesting to note.
the Utes were the Native Americans that populated that area, and supposedly it was historic. Even the story goes, which is that area where all this phenomena was happening, they themselves kind of stayed away from it because it was known to be traversed by what the Navajos called Navajo skinwalkers or witches, okay,
Right.
which were known to be cannibals. I mean, boy. And then you ask yourself, because everybody thinks it's because of the skinwalkers, but was there something already there, which is why the skinwalkers would go there specifically? They're not the cause. They would just go to that area because of what was there, whether it was a ley line or something going on in the land that, of course, you couldn't perceive with your
Well,
naked
and we
eye.
know how even geomagnetically, that's one thing, but why geomagnetically? Well, certain minerals and things that occur,
Yes.
and combinations of certain minerals, veins of quartz, gold, platinum, selenium. There's so many different things that have the potential to create course of energy or capaciting of energy and holding energy in certain ways. If you had a huge butte that had
Yes.
an alarming chunk of quartz that was continually being heated by the sun day after day,
Yes.
it has the potential to be highly electric in that sense. I mean, early quartz radios, you can see them in books. You can Google them
Yes.
online. They're tiny little radios with a hunk of quartz.
Yes.
You just put it in the sun, charges it up, turn the little radio on, you get your signal come in. And
Yes.
I think that's also the possibility too. And in your statement, wow, the Navajo people and the people of that area obviously recognize that
Right.
zone as maybe we should stay out of here. It's not good land.
Right. In
We're
other
not gonna,
words, right. In other, it's like we don't want to figure out why it is a bad area.
yeah,
Just don't go there. Don't
it
go
just
there.
is. Yeah, it
Exactly.
just is.
Exactly. It is. And that's the last I've heard of it. I thought it was very interesting because of the amount of phenomena that's been reported there. Um, like really, almost like, and I don't want to use such a dramatic, but a lot of it is almost, I want to say, dangerous or malevolent. It's not like, oh, I see lights in the sky. This was. They also had a lot of cattle mutilations. I
Wow.
mean, things like that, like, and they were hearing things from under the ground, like in the house, like from the underground. Just it was a whole range of things. I was like, wow, this place, like, there's something definitely going on. And like you said, maybe they ran the battery out for a while, and that's why
Yeah.
they had to like move everybody off. Like, okay, or I mean, it could be a million reasons, or it's just like, okay, let's just keep a low profile. All these humans are getting, you
Right,
know,
but it could be a place of deceit. I mean, the
yes,
possibilities inside of dimensional paranormal in terms of what
yes,
mediums are seeing.
yeah,
They're like, there's this thing here at this location, and it has tentacles. It has a beak like a parrot, and it's stuck to the ceiling, and all it wants to do is suck energy from the people here.
yeah,
So what is that? What is that? That is more, malevolent than anything that you can think of. What's
of
its
course,
agenda? To destroy. Why? That's its only purpose.
exactly. And
So
a
there's
lot of people
there's
have a
got
hard time, you know, the
seeing that.
conceiving of something like that. Which, when you describe that to me, it's very Cthulhu-like, H.P. Lovecraft. As far
Yeah,
as the tentacle
I was
thing.
kind of going down that road, right? But and we then ourselves have that potential to create just that very thing that destroys
Yes.
us.
Yes, and we talked about it earlier. where we talked about rips in interdimensional rips. Remember when we talked about that movie, The Mist, which is that's like that. Think about it. That's almost like an experiment into that area that just, of course, gets away from the military, and then what crosses it over is stuff that we're not. These. It's almost like the same thing. You know, when you see Jurassic Park, the moral of that story was humans could not have coexisted with Jurassic Park dinosaurs in their real time because we would have been the end of us. You see
That's
what
right.
I'm saying?
That's right.
Because forget it, we're outgunned big time, and you know maybe the same thing happens every once in a while. If there is such a thing as a rip in dimensions, maybe sometimes what crosses back and forth is something that of course doesn't exist in our dimension, and thankfully it doesn't. But every once in a while, when something sneaks through or it's let in, well, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, we get the short end of the stick, or we're like, huh?
Well, that's portals and doorways and stuff that are at locations that are either there because of a traumatic experience, or they were,
Yes.
like you said, deliberately conjured
Yes, they are.
in order to do that.
Yes.
Those then people that are in confronting those things are greatly affected by it. Some of which discounted as nothing more than just coincidence again, as I mentioned, but the horrible, terrible things that you can't help but not chalk up to go, well, this thing is trying to kill you.
Yes.
And everything that's been going on to you is a direct result of that. And there should be no other reason why that you're feeling this way, like you're a healthy person, but you're having a heart attack. You're fighting with your family all of a sudden, and you got along before you moved in here, and da 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 da.
Yes.
All of that means that there's something obviously influencing.
Yes.
You,
And sometimes
and
it's a
people,
process. It's like what you just described. It starts as this, and then on this other thing, and then this other thing. Everything is unraveling. And of course, nobody leads a perfect life. Everybody has bad things happen, some worse than others. But then it's like it gets better, and then life. But then there's,
That's right.
like you said, some people. It's like, man, they can't catch a break, and it's like, okay, what is it that's out to make you wish that you had never been born? Basically, is where it's going to take you to.
Well, and I see there's the thing, and then good investigative work shows it. Yeah, look at Steve DeShavi, the ex-homicide investigator that works with Amy Allen, the media.
Yes.
So he's running a parallel investigation to her investigation.
Right.
And he finds out that 200 years ago, this was Indian land, and they didn't want to go there. They stayed away from it. In the 1800s, 1890s, somebody came and built a farm there.
Yes.
Then all this bad stuff started happening. Son shot himself in the head. Father shot himself in the head. Grandfather shot himself in the head.
Right.
Then the 1990s kick in. Somebody else moves in there. They live there for a period of time. They shoot themselves in the head.
What are the odds on that?
2000 right. Now, Steve does all of this stuff and goes, well, wait a minute. There is this connection to the land from many, many years ago. It was ignored and stayed away from by Aboriginal people. People that moved here didn't know it, set up their lives, started experiencing this stuff. Meanwhile, the medium, Amy, she's pulling all this stuff up, going, this, that, and the other thing. You cannot help but not go, okay, there's some kind of connection to the land. It's been a porthole. These people are now being affected by it. And I think this is one of the wonderful things I love so much about the Aboriginal communities.
Yes.
Is that they're still so connected to what that feels like.
Well, and I want to say that a lot of times it's not so much that we need to know why. It's enough to, like you said, stay away from that place. Well, all we know is stay away from it. Nobody needs to go find out why or who or what is making it a bad place. Just stay away from it.
It just is.
It just is. Exactly. That's enough for us. And, let's not talk about that anymore, or that thing. That Stephen King novel, The Pet Cemetery, where
right.
The history on that piece of land was that the natives that had lived there even before anybody knew enough that this was some woods that you didn't go there. This was like a demon haunted place. But of course, it's that movie, Nobody Listens to the Kid. Well, this is like nobody goes and looks up, especially when you have a non-technological civilization or people living on the land, people sometimes discount it as superstition. Oh,
Right.
they're just being superstitious, and there's nothing to it. It's like, why? Why? Just because they couldn't offer some type of proof as to stay away from this area and don't live there?
Right.
don't don't set
Right.
up your
And
farm?
there may be so many variables in what it
Yeah,
represents today that it's hard to see really what the greater impact of it is.
of course.
Oh,
Of
this
course.
was native land. We built 1,000 homes. Well, two people died right after the subdivision was built. Oh, well, that's just coincidence. Well, maybe that's just coincidence, but that small percentage of people inside of 1,000 homeowners is still high enough, in my books, to question something in some way. Somebody that's just, let's say, dies out of the blue and they're like 50 something. They just have a heart attack. Why did that happen? Is there something that's connected to the land? Um, and objects. It's not just land. The psychometry of
Yes.
certain things also
I'm
too can
glad.
be
Yeah, I'm glad you bring
inside of.
that up because I tell people, you know how nowadays people, flea markets and garage sales or curbside pickups, people leave stuff on the curb. I go, you gotta be really careful with some of this stuff when you bring it home. Okay,
Yeah,
you know, let's. I'm
yeah.
not saying be paranoid, but you gotta be a little bit careful sometimes.
Well, but and you can almost be. It's like when you walk into a place, a house or a circumstance or situation, and you just go, you know what? I don't feel right now. I'm just gonna walk out of here just
Yeah,
because I just and you're not entirely sure, but later you
right.
find out I don't. There was a shooting at the incident or
Yes,
something,
yes,
or
exactly.
there was a big fight that broke out, or
Yeah,
something like that occurred. But you have this precognition of maybe even seeing it occur. And the
yes,
same thing with an object. You're like, oh, I really like this cup, but it was owned by some maniacal dog beater. Like you don't.
right. Yes, and I tell everybody, when people move into new houses and everything's got a fresh coat of paint and cleaned, and you're thinking, wow, this is great. And I was like, you got to be careful also what's gone on in those. I tell everybody, you need to smudge it down, bless it, whatever your religious beliefs are, because you never
Right.
know exactly what you said. Sometimes things like that, either events, it becomes imprinted in the fabric of the place,
That's right.
and
That's
you
right.
walk into it, you move in all innocent like, and like you said, then all of a sudden you're like having a fight with everybody around you, and before you were happy, and after you moved to this place, you're like, very unhappy person, and you're like, what
Right.
happened? What? And then at some point, hopefully, you realize the point of origin is after you moved in there.
Well,
Yeah.
and you know what? And it's not even superstition, but I have that feeling. Okay, so when I bought the farm,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, um, the previous owner had a really wonderful detailed record from our local museum
Okay.
of who built the house, when it was built, who lived here, what was going on, all of that kind of stuff. And I, point blank, when I was buying the house, was like, so who died here? I want to know, like, is there any spirits here? Is there any spiritual activity? And he told me outright, we haven't experienced anything, but I will say that Mrs. Firth was living in your living room and she was destitute and she died in that room. And I'm like, okay, so have you had any connections with her since she's been here? And it's, oh, every once in a while we smell lilac. And
Okay.
lilac was her favorite, like, kind of perfume body powder that she would use.
Okay.
I've smelt it a couple times. My wife smelt it a couple of times, but I've never been threatened or
Right.
felt intimidated by any kind of negative presence. And this house was built in 1866.
Okay.
So for a location to be impregnated with a lot of potential energy, it has
Right.
that potential.
Right.
But I've never felt threatened. I've
Well,
never felt.
like I said, once upon a time, people would be born and die in their houses. Not that long ago, relatively speaking. You know,
Yeah.
it was normal. It wasn't morbid, I guess is my point. It wasn't morbid. You would have your babies at home and you would die, and you would sometimes even have the wake in your downstairs, whatever. So when people say, oh, people died, it's like, no, no, no. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be haunted. That was the norm. Okay.
How long ago did you say?
What, as far as what?
When people would have the wakes in their houses.
What, less than 100 years ago.
We had my father's wake in our house in 1992.
There you go.
He,
God,
but
there.
that's part of Slovak tradition to sit outpost, which is what it's called,
Okay. All
and
right.
you have to sit. It's like Shiva for the Jewish community,
Mm-hmm.
and be with the body for 72 hours while it makes its transition from this
Right.
life into the next.
Right.
But that customary tradition that you say, some people might think, well, that's really crazy or da da da.
Right.
After that happened, I never felt my dad's
Right.
presence in the
But
house
what I'm
or
saying
like
is, if
anything.
people, you tell somebody, oh, somebody died in the house, or God, there was a wake, and they're like, whoa, that's like, is it haunted? And it's like, no, that doesn't mean
Yeah,
that.
right,
Not at
right,
all. On the
right.
contrary, this was the norm. And of course, little by little, people started to the hospital and all that other stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. As a matter of fact, you could have somebody that passed away in a hospital, and they might come back and haunt the place because another thing. And one thing doesn't necessarily correlate with the other.
No,
Uh,
or they may be attracted to somebody at the hospital and you don't know why they're attracted to that person at the hospital.
oh,
That's
it
and that's
could
why they
be.
end up at the hospital.
They could be. There's people that pass away. They're medicated, heavily medicated. They miss the you just died memo.
Right,
They
exactly. Yeah.
they died traumatically unconscious. They like they had an accident. They're unconscious. They pass away, and they miss the I died moment. The last thing
I've
they
heard I've heard mediums say that a ton of times where like
yes.
this person is here and they still don't know that they have
Mm-hmm.
died.
Yeah,
And it's
there's
like 150 years later.
right. They're still self-aware, and then you get the other ones that they kind of understand they're dead, but they might have had religious beliefs about hell, and
Right.
they think they're like, I'm not really happy here, but if I go over there, I'm going to get judged, and I'm going to a hot place,
But,
so I'll just stick out
yeah.
right around here, and be obnoxious, and just
And meanwhile, they're interacting with a
yes,
class 5 leatherback vapor demon or something that happens to be
yes.
living on another dimension in that same location.
Exactly, exactly. That's something that people they talk about. If anybody, and I don't know if you've heard about some of the interviews with the Edward Martin Malachi. I'm sorry, that
Oh, Malachi, yeah, yeah, yeah.
he talked about the middle plateau. Okay, and he says that that's that in between stage where you get human spirits that are lost, that are confused, whatever, that haven't transitioned, but you also got a lot of other stuff there, which
Right.
is non-human, uh, dangerous in some cases, or what you said that are looking for to either torment or kill a human being. And I've even heard of remote viewers that if you have an experience with remote viewing over X amount of time, that this is one of the areas you go into when you're remote viewing, that you have to be careful, that that's one of the risks when you do the remote viewing, that you have to be
I've
really
even heard
careful.
that with deep medium meditation where people can
Yes,
go so far into it that their heart will stop and they just go
yes.
to the other side through the
or they
process.
or they or they come into contact. In other words, it's almost like uh, when you go into this area, there's no division of, hey, this is safe to be there and this is not safe, or it's you're basically wandering in an area where you could trip across something that's non-human, dangerous, things of that nature, in
Well,
that
and even
vacuum.
even even some mediums would say alien.
Or alien, yes, that we could, that's a whole, that you got to come back, we got to talk about this some more, Ed, about the and I know there's people out there that are saying, okay, that some of these aliens are really interdimensional demonic beings versus, when you think of extraterrestrials, you're thinking extraterrestrial from the Pleiades, whatever, or
Right.
and they travel, whether it's linear or some type of like when you see in the movies the light speed and you're there. But what if that's not the
Wormhole.
wormhole? That you bring point A and B together through that wormhole. But what if it's not that? What if the theory is that they're really intradimensional beings that, for maybe because of a misunderstanding, we consider them extraterrestrial as in from another, but they're really from another dimension.
Exactly. No, and that's the thing. I think that theoretical physics is telling us there's 11 to 13 possible dimensional wavelengths that we exist inside of which three we can really only experience. That means that there's far more rooms
Yes.
in the proverbial house than we know. If I'm living in one room and you're living in another room,
Yes.
we both know we're in a room, but we don't know we're in a building.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say, if I'm making a whole bunch of noise in my room and you can
Yes.
hear it, but you're unsure of what's really going on,
Mm-hmm.
you're making assumptions as to what's going on in that room based on something that you can't
Yes.
see, hear, touch, feel, any of those kinds of things. So
Yes.
then what do? You bang on the wall. And I hear something. And I'm like, what is that? Is that Marlene on the other side of the, do I even know
Yes.
Marlene? Who
Yes.
is that? Where did that band come from? It's all of that same sort of idea. So if we can say, yes, there's validity to this dimensional concept to physics
Yes.
and hyperdimensionality, why then are these interactions so hard to discount? And why couldn't that be the case? If it is a sentient, a type of alien being that we don't understand, extraterrestrial in nature, living dimensionally in a different plane, that's one aspect of it. If it's something that is using that dimension to transfer from one place to
Yes.
another, that could also be a possibility.
Yes.
Your statement before, which was so wonderful, which was, if we keep an open head about it, that's the most
Yes.
important
Of
thing. We will
course.
always come to a point in the road where we go, no, we understand what that is already. This
No.
is valid or it's invalid. But we have to keep going down the road.
No, there's so many
The road,
possibilities that could be,
right.
that you could say, yeah, and I'm guilty as anyone. I hear some ideas and I'm like, that's plausible, and then I hear others, I'm like, wow, man, that's what? Okay, I'll keep an
Right,
open
right,
mind,
right.
but okay, I have a hard time with that one. But still, I always leave, that little, like, the door ajar a little bit, like, okay, maybe something might come of this. I think we all have our different levels or degrees of what we think is plausible or possible or probable.
Right.
But like we were talking about, it's the person, the hardcore skeptic, which doesn't allow any possibility. I mean, I think most of it is fueled by fear of, then what do I do with my existence if all of a sudden there's a crack in the armor of the order of my world, okay, which allows
But
for
see, that's
ghost
the,
extraterrestrials, cryptids. Oh God.
but the fear is, I think, to me, the indicator. I love so many people that I work with, and we get into crazy debates about
Yeah.
wild stuff
Yeah.
and things that are like hard to even like. You could never discuss this around a dinner table. This is crazy kind of talk.
Yes, but
But then I bring up a paranormal experience with something that has been so profound, like my friend passing,
mm-hmm.
and immediately I don't want to talk about that. I
Yeah.
don't.
See.
I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. It scares the hell out of some people because, like you said, it ruptures and fractures everything that they know about
Yes.
their normal existence. But I
Yes.
see it as something beautiful and, like you said, at the same time, potentially dangerous.
Yes. Yes. It's almost like a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Like, but anyway,
And maybe why your statement has so much gravity too is because you're saying maybe it's something we're not meant to yet understand. We
right,
don't have
right.
the mental and spiritual complexity
You know
yet to be
what? The
able to
other
understand it.
day, I was listening, and I don't know if you're familiar at all with Bob Lazar. That he worked.
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
the other day I was hearing an interview that Joe Rogan did with him, and he made an analogy, and I was like, man, this is really interesting. And basically, he was talking about what he had witnessed, and everything back in the 80s when he was working out there in these labs, or, where they're trying to basically back engineer the discovery
Mm-hmm.
of these ships or whatever they are, right? And he's talking about, like, oh, if we took something, let's say a nuclear, I guess, an engine or something, and we dropped it back in Victorian times. And, the scientists or the top minds would look at it, they couldn't understand it, and they're probably at some point are going to try to do what they're trying to do now. And he was describing, I think it was one of the parts where they were trying to cut into something, into the core of something. And he would kind of became alarmed. He's saying, because he was like, we don't know, what are we doing when you cut into something or you're trying to back engineer it? You have to be careful what happens. Are you going to blow up? Same thing. He says, if you drop something that was nuclear back in the Victorian times and they're tinkering around with it, trying to figure it out, what if they start cutting into it, and the next thing whatever, because they don't really understand truly what is the how this is being fueled, what nuclear fusion or fission or whatever it is, what all these electrons, whatever causes the nuclear reaction to go on. And the next thing you know, they blow up the lab or the area. And he was kind of amazed. I thought, man, that's a great way of looking at it, because he became alarmed about. He described some of the things that they were trying, their efforts in trying to figure out how this thing, basically, how the energy was being or propelled itself.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Maybe not that it's not meant to. You want to be philosophical about it, but are we ready? Do we really understand something as to what do we do with it?
Right. Right.
Can we
Well, and
handle what comes with
he
it?
was he was. I don't know if we can. I mean, there are people, according to the documentary that I saw, that it's Mickey Rourke
Right.
is the voiceover for it, and George Knapp is in it,
Mm-hmm.
and from what I understand of some other people's research about the phenomenon, that there's people that have lost their faculties.
Yes.
There's people that have ended up with chronic and critical and
Yes.
dilapidating disease, have died as a
Mm-hmm.
result of the process of
Right.
even working in a public, well-known group like Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, some of the
Yes.
development material that they originally put together for
Yes.
different types of military aircraft projects. People died. They're still in the courts trying to, the families
Right.
fighting for what had happened. And then, his story is quite interesting. And you're right. Like, what would have happened? How do we, even if a caveman saw
Right.
a rainbow,
Yes.
what is the interpretation? This is the thing about the technology that people have been supposedly back engineering. And I think why they use the word magic as a
Mm-hmm.
part of what that technology represents, and is because it's still greatly misunderstood, and they're still trying to come to understand what it actually is. I think Bob's story is very interesting for a number of reasons. One,
Right.
he hasn't really gained much of anything. In
Yeah.
fact, he's really, it's hindered his existence as a
Yeah, that's
person.
what it sounded like. Yeah. Yeah. They
Two,
it's very punishing, it
he
sounds
he,
like.
he mentioned things in those documentaries in the 80s that he did with George Knapp that
Mm-hmm.
nobody knew anything about,
Yes.
that didn't even exist, and only in the last number of years have they actually released any information about
Exactly.
those things. So that his story is whether or not he's a disseminator of
Could
certain
be.
things, which is the possibility, or he actually really experienced it. It's enough to look at, because if he is a disseminator and that information is out there, why is he disseminating it? And who really is in control of the information to
Oh
allow him
yeah,
to
well,
become a
man, talk about it.
disseminator?
Let's go down that rabbit hole. Is it like
Right, right. We could go. It's like, whoa,
well, and he made a good point. He says, you know what, it was very frustrating, but they kept all these groups of scientists like working like in pairs, but you would never have access to the entire project. In other words, you only had that little piece of work that you were working on. And he says, and I understood we could have made more progress if everybody was in on the same at the same time working on it. But he said purposely they would keep everybody isolated one from the other so that nobody could have the whole picture.
right. It's known as systemic methodology. The Manhattan Project worked on the same thing. There was over, 1,000 people or more that were working on what that bomb represented, and its eventual detonation, but really only 10
Right.
people that had a greater understanding of its purpose. A friend of ours many years ago, he worked for a small subsidiary company here in Canada. They started manufacturing a part. They didn't know what it was for.
Okay.
Wasn't until years later that he realized it was part of the Avro Aero jet project that we
Mm-hmm.
had here in Canada, but they shopped out, didn't tell companies
Yes. Right.
what they were manufacturing, for the sole purpose of the same thing, to keep it
Right.
quiet and clandestine. So
And all that company knew is we're just producing this one piece of whatever that was. That was it.
right, that's it.
Yeah.
Batashu, they did the same thing many years ago. They claimed, when they were taken to the press about how they were helping out with munitions of tracking devices and or telemetry devices for certain kinds of nuclear warheads, Bata had claimed that they didn't know what they were doing. They had a private contract through a subsidiary. They needed a certain type of a disc made of a certain kind of alloy. They agreed to it. They put the machinery into the company. They started making them, and that was it. Ultimately, all they cared about was they got the manufacturing job, and they were going to make
Yes,
money.
of course, which is what the business is in business for, really.
Right.
I mean, they're not there like, okay, well, by the way, what are you going to use this for? You know, it's like, okay, let's talk ourselves out of this business deal. You
Right,
know,
right, right. But
yeah.
again, they didn't know, almost know, and that was plausible denial for them
Mm-hmm.
to say, "Well, we were just doing our job.
Yes.
We had
Yes.
no idea it was part of a tracking device for a warhead. We had, we didn't know that."
Right, and and I think a lot of companies or businesses fall into that, knowingly or unknowingly, you know. And what little they
Yeah.
know is like, I'm not gonna ask any more about this. As long as like the check clears, you know what they say. That's all I need to know. And
And when you got the potential of a manufacturing deal hanging in front of your company in
oh
the millions, if
sure,
not billions
millions,
of dollars,
yes,
why would you say anything?
exactly.
Right? That's what they're thinking.
And a lot, yeah. There's a lot. There's a great deal of distrust. I like what you said. Is this person disseminating information now? In other words, this is all pre-planned, or is it just that, for lack of a better word, his time has come? As in, what he claimed years ago. Now a lot of it is actually being proven to be accurate.
Right.
Like what could it be? I just think a
Right.
lot of people now are starting to question things like, don't get me wrong, not everything is a deception, but I think that nowadays most people are like, you know, like what we said
I'm.
earlier. What is this person?
There's a
Is
lot.
there something for them to gain out of it?
Well, and that's where the mistrust is there. Like, I mean, I see it with many things. I just spent a month in New York City, and playing, working, and releasing a video. And I so often had conversations that somehow repunctuated the distrust of an organization, a company, a municipality, the
Yes.
government official,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And I think you're right. It's sad. Your statement is true,
Yes.
but sad because it's the transparency of certain things that allow
Yes.
people to understand more about it, so they feel safe. Otherwise, they feel threatened by it.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people wanted to be assumed that, hey, this was going to be okay.
Right.
In other words, the powers that be, or they're looking out for us, and a lot of people are realizing or suspecting. Sometimes it's paranoia. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it is paranoia, and other times it is accurate. It depends how you want to look at it. But
Well, and I think if you are going through the process of rehashing the same thing over again, like, hey, this happened 4 years ago,
yes,
and it's happening again, that starts to show itself. Like the kid that shows up at class, every week, and they couldn't take the test for some other reason. Well, you're not prepared. It's starting to show off as this. So
yeah,
that mistrust comes from that, as well as people's misinterpretations of certain things that are askew,
yes,
obviously. But other things you cannot help but go, wait a minute, this has been happening over and over again. It's been getting
yeah.
worse and worse. So why do we keep?
Well, you know what? That's another thing about what is it? The effects of new technology, where everything's being recorded. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it bites you in the ass.
That's right. It will always help. It will always help and then hinder some way.
Yes.
Right.
Anyway, Ed, I'm gonna go ahead. I gotta bring you back because we gotta continue this
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
conversation.
do it. I love talking to you, and I
It
gotta
was
say, I
great.
love your hair. Your blue hair is
Oh, thank
wicked.
you,
Yeah,
thank
it's so
you.
much fun.
Yes,
Yeah,
I had a great time, darling. I had a
me
wonderful time.
too.
You got to come back, and
You too.
we got to continue this conversation, and well, walk on the wild side when it comes to the
Sure.
paranormal and all this weird stuff, which I think is very interesting. You know, like what I say. When the edges are kind of foggy and it goes off into who knows where. Well, let's talk about what the possibilities are.
For sure. I would love to come back. You're a beautiful person, and
You are too, darling.
I've had a lovely conversation talking about it, and it's just been free, like two people hanging out,
Yes, yes.
having a Lola, and watching the sunset. You know what I mean?
Yes, we are. We are.
Yeah.
Take care.
You too. Love you. Take care.
Bye bye, babe.
Ciao. Bye.
Wasn't he great? He's such a cool guy. You know what? See, even musicians have a paranormal side to their life. As a matter of fact, I have found in my experience that most creative people, whether it's music, art, stories, writing, but that are more into they tap more into their creative nature, not so much. I'm not going to say that the analyst, because like, there's a part of me that's pretty analytical, but I don't know if it just unplugs something in your brain, or just the fact that for the creative process you have to like let go of your preconceived ideas, or that stuff that we have sometimes as children doesn't totally leave you. You know how children, their imagination is so wild and free, and you'll tell them anything like Santa Claus and they believe it, or the Easter Bunny and they believe it, or the Tooth Fairy and they believe it. They really believe it. And I can attest to that because I had 3 children of my own, and I kept them going on with the Santa Claus things for years. And they believed it, by the way. They really believed it until, of course, eventually they kind of realized it's the parents who are doing it. But they really believed it. And I think that people that tap into the creativity, that part of them in their brain doesn't totally shut down. Yes, you grow up and you become more practical, or, for example, you understand the Santa Claus isn't real, but that part of you that feeds your creativity, or is a source of your creativity, also allows you to see things that maybe a more analytical person would not see. You know how they say certain people can see more because for some reason they see a more range of colors in their vision, their field of vision? It would be something along the same lines, where when you tap in more into your creativity, you see the possibilities. And I think once you see the possibilities, once you come across those situations or those events, not like something like what happened with Ed, not because he was looking to have a sighting of a cryptid, he was just walking out in his field, and you see it and it just happens. It's like almost that you it's, and I've talked about this before, almost like a magnetizing effect, that things or events are witnessed by the people that have the open-mindedness or the vision, even, and in this case literal vision in your eyes, to see it, and sometimes to hear it, depending. Because I've heard sometimes of really super analytical people being witnessed and next to a person, and they'll shut down. They just do not see it. They literally force their senses to shut down and not see or experience it because they're just not wired that way. Okay, so unless it's something that runs up and slaps them in the face, they're and if they ever feel, it's always will be on the periphery, and they explain it away as imagination, something else, whatever. I've run across this so many times, a direct link between creativity, the creative process, and people that are able to see certain things that happened, and I'm not talking here psychically, okay? I'm not talking psychically, because I'm talking about actually being at certain places at certain times to see or experience certain things. But sometimes things that don't have to experience something, it doesn't necessarily have to be visual or auditory. You could experience something in your body, in your skin, in your senses, that you feel it. It's it's like kinetic. And sometimes you actually see it. It depends, but you're there to have that experience. I've heard of people, let's say, that will be, I'm going to use an example close to what he described, where they're in the woods or someplace. Sometimes they're alone with one other person, and they feel overwhelmingly like they're being watched, or a very deep sense of menace. Like, in other words, everything is fine. They're feeling great. They're maybe walking and enjoying nature, and then all of a sudden they come to a part of the woods, or something intrudes, that you realize something's changed. Maybe it's the absence of animal noises or something, and everything changes. They feel like they're being watched. Some cases, people describe even feeling like they're being hunted. And it's not because they're seeing or hearing anything per se, but they feel it. And I think that, and then there's other people that, well, they just, and sometimes, believe it or not, it doesn't necessarily have to be, let's say, the story of you've got Bigfoot, looking at you from behind a tree. You could be being stalked by a bear or a panther or a cougar or something. And, maybe this is the person that gets out of there in one piece, and the over-analytical person who poo-poos it as my imagination's like, oh God, this is stupid. They get devoured. I'm making a point by being extreme, but they don't pay attention to what they're feeling because they don't see it. They don't see the bear or the predator or the threat. They just feel like their senses are going off, going, hey, something is looking at you or hunting you or looking at you as prey. And since that doesn't compute, like, that's just a feeling. And I've heard of this happening even for people that have been victims of crime. Okay, where they ignore feelings of fear. Because let's face it, nobody wants to feel fear. It's a very disagreeable feeling. And when I say fear, I'm not talking about the fear of like when you go to the movies and you see a scary film and everybody jumps and whatever, and your popcorn goes everywhere. No, I'm talking about real true fear that you feel that you're in peril, your safety is in question, or your life is in question. Nobody likes to feel that fear. And I've heard of people ignoring those feelings of fear because they dismiss it, and then they've gotten victimized, in some cases even killed. Mostly they survive, and they retell how before this event, or they were attacked, or somebody tried to get them, sometimes they get away, how they had these feelings of being watched, or something told them, in their head, you need to get out of here. And they dismissed it. Or, man, somebody's following you, you're being followed. No, that's just me thinking. And they were being followed. They were being targeted. And my point being that I'm not looking at it just strictly from a paranormal, like I said, you've got Bigfoot, or it's Dogman behind the tree wanting to, eat you. No, there's predators out there that are very real. Okay, and they're not animals. Well, they're humans. Okay, and a lot of them do exactly what predators do in the so-called animal kingdom, because even though we're animals, but I'm gonna, differentiate between us and the animals, where they stalk the prey. Okay, the same way an animal in the wild will stalk its prey, and whether it's a pack or one solitary, and they think, okay, how am I going to isolate that one, or how am I, I'm looking for all these telltale signs. Same thing, they're looking for somebody that's either sick, elderly, distracted, alone, in a place that's isolated where nobody will hear screams, or depending where, you hear about some human predators, where they fixate on a certain person and they follow them around for a few days just to see what their, what do they do, where they go, who do they live with, do they live by themselves, what's their routine like, or how can I get in there, are they like, are they very just like, they don't care about locking their doors, or they leave a window open. Yeah. And a lot of times, they've interviewed some people that have survived encounters with either animals or humans that have attacked them. And a lot of them will say, you know what, before this I felt certain things, or I heard certain things, but I just dismissed it. I just thought it was my imagination. It's almost like when you see the slasher film where people hear noises and they dismiss it, or nobody pays attention to the kid, or one of those things. Well, it's something like that. And it's almost like, again, if you want to look at it, that creativity, it allows. And by this, as a matter of fact, me and Ed were talking about it before we started to record, where because we discuss these things, there is we set a very high bar as far as skepticism is concerned. As far as, just because we talk about these things, there's nothing that says that we're going to say, man, that's a load of crap. Okay? Because there's a lot of people out there that are either lying, their grasp on reality is not that good, mental illness, a lot of other stuff, or just whatever, they're BSing. That doesn't mean you buy into every theory, every story, every experience and take it as gospel and run around with it. Like, yeah. But, in other words, it's a different type of degree, but that you have a certain standard as far as, even for your own personal experiences, that you say, you know what? This can be explained away by this and this and this, and this is what's logical. And this is probably, before going down the route of thinking, okay, you know what? This is paranormal in origin, or this is not natural. This was not caused by something natural. I mean, in other words, that's the last thing that has to pass a litmus test before you get to that. And we were talking about that. That contrary to what a lot of people think about people that believe in the paranormal or anything, in that field, under that umbrella, that will, everything. Oh yeah, I believe everything. And it's like, no, I don't. And even then, even the things that you hear sometimes that are like, man, that sounds really implausible. You always kind of leave the door open and don't slam it in the face of the people that you're like, man, there's something that's not quite, because you're thinking, what if this person, this is because maybe it doesn't fit my reality of what I think is probable or possible. And what if it is? Maybe the one that's wrong is me, that I might not believe it or think it's kind of like, But and we were also discussing, how they have the hardcore skeptics that shut everybody down, that they don't care, forget the proof. It's like, forget it. And then, of course, we get into my favorite, that to me, that equates to, you're basically, your hardcore skepticism is fueled a lot of times by fear of, well, if any of these things prove to be accurate, does that open the door to all my preconceived ideas that I have my tight little world fixed in? Then that's it, that crack, and that's it. It can never be put back. That Pandora's box. So everything in my reality, my existence shifts, and that would be so overwhelming. If any of these things prove, they don't even have to be totally accurate or true, just a little bit, then it's like, that's it. When something cracks, that's it. Once that crack starts, eventually it goes all the way until it finally opens apart. A lot of people don't want to let that crack into their belief system, into their existence and their worldview and the structure of how they operate. And these are the ones that no. And, everybody's delusional or a liar or mistaken or taking drugs, whatever, anything except this is. And you know what? And I've said it before. Every one of those person, that's cool, man. That's what makes you happy, and that's why it's good to be different, because there's people that this is just the way they need to operate, and that's fine. And you know what? If that's what makes you happy and how you stay, that's great, as long as you don't shut us other little weirdos down. But anyway, guys, I hope you liked this episode. I really loved speaking to Ed. And I forgot to ask him to mention his website address for the pod. The link will be in the credits of the show, but for those of you who are listening to the podcast, it's edroman.net, edroman.net. If you want to reach out, you can also find him on Facebook and on Twitter. He's He's a gentleman farmer. I love that. A gentleman farmer, a musician, and a believer in the paranormal. All right, guys, take care. You're all wonderful.